welcome to yet another edition of Tiffin Talks. This is very special. In fact, I love my occasional appearances on Tiffin Talks because I always get to talk to people who are in the world of food and who write beautiful books, very delicious books on food, books that make you hungry and ask for more. Well, the person who's with me today is Mohona Kanjilal from Kolkata. Welcome, Mohana. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And this is a book, A Taste of Time, published by Speaking Tiger. It's a fascinating book on a fascinating subject. The subject is Kolkata, and we all know that Kolkata not only has a hoary history, but it also has a great food culture which borrows from a lot of different sources, and yet it has its own specialities. Kolkata, as you know, has been home to so many communities: the Armenian communities, the Jewish community, and of course the people from the hills. And then there are people from the neighboring states, Bihar, Odisha, particularly. So Kolkata is like India in a microcosm, and that beautiful diversity, I would say the dazzling diversity of Kolkata comes across in this book, A Taste of Time. I think it should be on the stands. If not, I mean, nowadays we all go to Amazon and do our purchases. So without much ado, let me get Mohana into the show. Mohona Kanjilal from Kolkata. Welcome to Tiffin Talks.
Thank you.
And I will, begin straight away. Mohana, your previous two books were, I think, anthologies of short stories.
Yeah, they
Uh,
were short story
yeah,
collections. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Now, so obviously you were a writer of fiction. But tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in writing this great book on Kolkata and its food culture, food history.
Actually, I started my career as a freelance journalist. Really, I was working as I was freelancing for newspapers, and that is where you can say the writing bug bit me.
Really?
Right, and then I started, and after a few years, I decided to venture into full time writing. But then I thought, okay, let me um, start with, I used to write short stories, children's short stories to
Okay.
newspapers, and used to get carried in the newspapers. So,
Right.
along with even doing my bit of freelancing for
Right.
newspapers. So, somebody suggested, a dad's friend, that why doesn't she compile these
Right.
into a book and get them published? So that kind of struck me with the idea that why can't I be an author?
Right.
So I
Are
said,
you a
okay,
full-time author now, or are
full
you?
time, full time. So I
Wow.
said, okay, why not? Because I love writing so much. Let me be a full time author. Let me start by adding a few more children's short stories to this collection. And that's when I came out with my first book, Treasure Hunt in Jolly Boy and Other Stories. Then I
Right.
wrote another short story collection after that.
Right.
After that, what happened was I was looking for a topic for my third book,
Right.
but I was a bit not too sure. I was not getting any ideas. And one day happened to go to Newmarket, that's the
Right.
Stuart Hogg Market.
Right.
And I went there for my personal shopping. And I
Right.
went there, and I just happened to venture into Nahoum's. I got into
Right.
Nahoum's. I've been to Nahoum's many times before. But that day, I don't know. I think something special happened. I was destined to get this idea. I think
Right.
So I went into Nahoum's and I was buying stuff, and then it was taking some time to settle the bill.
Right.
And while it was taking some time to settle the bill, I was looking around. I just gazed around Nahoum's, really thoroughly looked at it, really,
Right.
And I felt there's an old world charm about that place, the entire decor. If people who've gone to Nahum, there's a weighing scale over there that's very old weighing scale.
Right.
And I saw all that, and then I was thinking that how many restaurants must be there like this that are so old?
Right.
And then I came back home, and I started thinking, and then I started researching, and I came across several restaurants which are
Right.
very, very old in Calcutta. But one common link I found in not all of them, but many of them, was that many of them were pre-independent eateries
Right.
that was still continuing and was still very popular.
Like, in fact,
I,
Kolkata, I think, has the oldest Chinese restaurant in the country,
yes,
which is still functioning. I think it's Eau Chew or whatever it's called.
Changwa,
Changhua. Okay, right.
Changwa,
Okay.
right, right.
So now that is one restaurant.
Yeah.
And you talked about Nahoums, which again is, Nahoums were are Baghdadi Jews,
Baghdadi Jews. It was
Yeah,
started in 1902,
right.
and
So, tell us a little bit about this diversity in Kolkata's food culture. You
yeah. So
talked
if
about
I
how
can,
you got into it.
yeah, so if I can continue, is that while I was exploring these restaurants, one of the things that I saw was they were interesting. I was going to these restaurants and interviewing them,
Right,
the owners, and then I saw that there was very interesting bits of food history also associated with Calcutta, very interesting. And this cosmopolitan food culture of Calcutta basically arrived in Calcutta with mainly when it became the capital of the British Raj.
right.
So that is what happened, is that to answer your question now, that
Yeah,
when it became the capital of the British Raj, plenty of communities from within India, from outside India came
right,
and settled in Calcutta, making it a very diverse and cosmopolitan atmosphere in Calcutta.
right,
And these communities brought with them their food culture,
right,
their culinary culture, which got blended with the local culinary culture.
right,
So, and gave rise to a very thriving, pulsating atmosphere with communities and different
right,
food and all that. So you have, the Armenians, the Portuguese, the
right,
British, they
right,
came, and then you have the Jews, and then you have the communities from within India, the Chinese, of course, the
right,
Parsis who fled to basically the Zoroastrians. They fled and they settled here first in other parts of the country, Bombay, Gujarat, Bombay, and then Calcutta, basically to escape persecution that was conducted against them. And then all these, then within India, like the Marwaris, which is a very big component of the Calcutta community today.
right,
There's Calcutta, and many
right.
others, Gujaratis, and they have lent their culinary culture to that of Calcutta.
Right. And like one community you did not mention was the Punjabis.
Punjabis, of course.
Yeah,
Oh yes,
in
there is.
fact,
Let me
the
get to
Punjab,
let
the
me get to
rest,
the
the
point.
restaurant culture of Calcutta owes so much to Punjabis.
Yes, yes,
And I'm
Punjabi.
speaking from Delhi,
Okay.
where Delhi, of course, once was a Punjabi city. Now
Yes.
it's increasingly become a Purbiya city, as we call it. People
Okay.
from Eastern UP and Bihar are now in a majority in Delhi, but still, Punjabis are quite a dominant community in Delhi.
Yes.
But talk
Yes.
about the Punjabi influence on Kolkata's food culture.
Punjabi influences, the Punjabis came and settled in Calcutta, and they mainly found, they were mainly farmers, and they found a lot of who came and initially they came and settled in Calcutta. They got into, you see this bus drivers, truck drivers, taxi drivers, Sikh taxi drivers were once very much a part of Calcutta, and they brought their food culture with them. Um, if you
So
talk about the
that
food
was
culture,
those were the dhabas.
yes. If you talk
And
about the dhabas, the first dhaba that came up in Calcutta was Bachchan's dhaba.
okay,
Bachchan's Dhaba. You see
right,
what happens. The Punjabis came and they settled in South Calcutta because Punjabis came a little later, and by the
right,
time the North Calcutta, especially Bara Bazar, where it was the concentration of most of these communities who first came and settled in Calcutta, all these
right,
places were becoming overcrowded. So
right,
South Calcutta is a place where the South Indians, the Punjabis, the Punjabis and South Indians, they came and settled there. So
right.
South Calcutta. So South Calcutta is where Punjabis and South Indians came and settled, and all the dhabas, the oldest, and even now,
Right,
majority of the dhabas all South Calcutta based.
right.
So you
So
have,
Bachchan's Dhaba is something you'd recommend people to go to.
yes,
Okay.
Bachchan's Dhaba. That's followed by, I think, the Baliganj Dhaba, and no,
Right,
Balwant Singh's Eating House and
right,
Baliganj Dhaba.
right.
Yes,
So
these are the
okay,
three
those are
go-to
the
dhabas.
dhabas. But if you see even the restaurant like Peter Cat or Ambar, these are all owned by Punjabi families
Yes,
who are now into the second or third generation, maybe.
yes,
And
yes.
they're of course they're very middle class or upper middle class. You talked about the Fluries, for instance, in a book. You have talked about the family.
Joseph and Frida Fleury, the
Yeah,
Swiss
but
couple who
okay,
set up
yeah,
Fleury.
they set up the pastry shop, but then the Pauls took over.
Was took over.
Yeah, and they came from Jalandhar, and
Right.
sort of. The point I'm trying to make is that how are these different communities that make up Calcutta reflected in its cuisine? Like, for instance, what would you rate as a great South Indian restaurant in Kolkata?
South Indian restaurants are.
I can't think of any.
We're talking about the greatest South Indian restaurant. You really
Right?
want me to name one? Well, my
Yes.
personal favorite is a modern restaurant, is which is not a very old one.
Right.
It's new one, but it is very good because it does not
Hmm.
only concentrate on dosa and all that, which are the
Right.
breakfast South Indian breakfast dishes, but also
Right.
they have chettinad chicken and many
Right.
other diverse things. That is Tamarind Restaurant.
Tamarind.
Again,
Okay.
it's South Calcutta based.
Okay. Where exactly in South
Sarad
Calcutta is
Bose Road.
Tamarind?
Sarad
Sharat
Bose Road.
Bose Road. Okay, fantastic. So, I thought that there are no South Indian restaurants in Kolkata, but
Mhm.
well, we have lead to one. Now, also another question, like a lot of people keep asking me, Bengalis eat such good food, but we don't hear of places other than say sweet shops. We have the famous sweet shops of Kolkata. But now tell me, what about Bengali restaurants? I know like there is Bhojori, Manna and all, but like if you were to explain to like a non-Calcutta person about the great Bengali restaurants of Kolkata, which ones would be your choices?
I would say O Calcutta, 6 Baliganj Place. These are the very upscale ones and very
Yeah,
good
yeah.
ones.
They're too posh.
Too posh.
Yeah.
Suruchi Restaurant.
Yes. Okay.
Suruchi.
Right.
Suruchi is the one that exactly started the restaurant culture in Bengali restaurant. It started with Suruchi many years back.
Can you tell a bit about Shuruchi's history?
Suruchi's history is that Suruchi basically it is a women's welfare. It is a welfare organization that
Right.
works with disadvantaged women and children.
Mm.
So they started the Suruchi restaurant, and at that point of time, there was no. This is long time back. At that point of time,
Mm.
there was no restaurants in Calcutta that came with that the Bengali restaurants in Calcutta. So
Mm.
in this way, I would say
Right.
it's a very bold move made by them
Mm.
that they
That's
came
right.
up with the Suruchi restaurant. And it
Right.
was more like a canteen, like not really a canteen, it's more like
Mm.
a restaurant that catered to the middle class clientele.
You're right.
And after Suruchi, I would say the restaurant that came up after that it picked up after that was QP's.
QPs, of course.
QP's.
Named
And
after the Bengali, the writer,
yeah,
Bangla
QP.
Ranna, right? The
And
author of
somewhere
Bangla
over
Ranna.
there, after
Mm.
there, somewhere in the there, no, in between the QPs is another that came up with that had catered to the middle class clientele, and it was slightly on the posher side, not
Mm.
like Suruchi was more like into the middle class clientele, but
Was it
I would
Aheli you're talking about?
no Aheli in between came up. So you see, it
Okay.
was Suruchi,
Yeah.
Aheli, which is very fine dining, which is
Right.
Peerless in hotel. It is very
Exactly.
fine dining
Right.
and QPs. So these three
QPs.
were the pioneers. QPs
Right.
was a bit of an upscale
Right.
restaurant.
And
And
then you had play O
then came
Calcutta's.
O Calcutta, Six Ballygunge Place, Bajori Manna. Now you
Right.
have plenty, plenty.
Plenty.
Yeah.
So Kolkata, I mean, Bengali fine dining as well as Bengali mass dining are very much now in, because one like even in once in a while, when you go abroad, the people who are actually keeping the Indian flag flying are Bangladeshis, basically people from Sylhet who are settled down in England. They run most of the so-called Indian restaurants. But ironically, in India, you hardly find any Bengali restaurants run by Bengalis, except the ones you've just mentioned. But it's good to know that.
Now there are plenty. Now there are
Yeah.
plenty that's coming up.
But you
What
also
is what is
talked about
nice
the cabins. Can you talk a bit about the cabins, the culture of cabins?
cabins, the word cabin is basically, it's stems from the fact that um, there are restaurants. It's a term that's loosely used for restaurants, but actually the meaning of the term cabin is where there are partitions inside the restaurant,
Okay.
right? Like there's a cabin system of, where there is a partition where you can
Right.
dine in privacy.
Right.
Mainly for families and all that.
Right.
So
So
every
say
restaurant.
like Bombay has family restaurants. Kolkata has cabins, like Onadi
No,
cabin.
it's a
What?
restaurant. See, for example, Dilkusha Cabin. I give an example. Dilkusha
Right.
Cabin. When you go into Dilkusha Cabin,
Right.
it's outside there is a seating arrangement for everybody. Inside they have a
Right.
separate place where there's a cabin system,
Okay.
which has, there's partition places with a curtain. You can dine
Right.
in your privacy. Families
Right.
prefer to dine that in that way. And
Right.
so this is the cabin system. So this is called, so these restaurants were basically known as cabin, but now it has come to be loosely associated the word cabin with restaurants, small restaurants,
Right.
that is, favorite
Right.
cabin, for example, favorite
Right.
cabin, which is
Right.
the well-known oldest tea shop. It does not
Right.
have a cabin system of arrangement, but it's known as favorite cabin.
Okay, because it's a small restaurant.
Small restaurant, yeah,
Right.
you can say that.
Right.
Loosely associated with small restaurants.
That's right. Right.
May not have the cabin system of seating
Right.
arrangement. Yeah.
So, coming back to your book, we'll come back to the restaurants again. We'll take a little tour across Calcutta, through its restaurants. But coming back to your book, what were some of the big discoveries you made about Kolkata and its eating culture?
Plenty. Difficult. Plenty.
What was your aha moment? What was the big
one of the important discovery I made was the influence that the Armenians had
Right.
on Kolkata's eating habits,
Right.
the Bengali eating habits, and that
Right.
is, if I can go into a bit of detail into it.
Please, absolutely.
So the thing is that Armenians, not many people know. Many people know, some may not know that there is a strong Armenian community living in Calcutta, and these Armenians they have a particular dish called the dolma.
Dolma.
And dolma is it's more like a Middle Eastern dish. It's basically grape leaves that are stuffed with ground meat, rolled into tiny cigar type shapes like that, and they are cooked in boiling water, hot water, And obviously you put other ingredients like a little bit of rice goes into it, a little bit of tomato puree goes into it, salt and other ingredients, but the basic thing is grape leaves stuffed with ground meat. And these are rolled into cigar-like things, small shapes, and they are cooked in hot water. And that's the dolma. Now, the word dolma, this is a very Middle Eastern thing. You get it in, it's in other countries also, like that area, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Armenia, Azerbaijan, all of them make dolma. The word dolma has come from derived from the Turkish word dolmak, which means to be stuffed. To be stuffed. So, the Armenians, actually, the Armenian word for it is tolma. Tolma. It comes from the word tolma comes from the word toli, which means grape leaf.
What is it?
The word tolma is derived from toli, T-O-L-I, which means grape leaf. Okay. Because basically the Armenians prefer to make it with grape leaf, but it can also be made with cabbage leaves,
right?
With aubergines, bell pepper, etc., whatever vegetables. But when the Armenians came and settled in Calcutta, it's difficult to find grape leaves.
Right.
So what they did is they began stuffing cabbage leaves and also potol.
Potol, yeah.
We call
pointed goat.
Parval or pointed goat. In Hindi it's parval, and we call it English it's pointed goat. So they began stuffing that with ground meat and everything. This is something that influenced the Bengalis. The Bengalis picked it up.
Right.
This whole idea of stuffing potol, pointed goat, with and following the whole thing, stuffing it with something and then cooking it. This idea from the Armenians by the Bengalis. Yes, they did not put ground meat; they put other stuff, and they obviously, if somebody cooked dolma for me, an Armenian, so I tasted it. They usually have it with curd, yogurt mixed with garlic powder. It may be a little bland, but it's very tasty. But because we are basically spice-loving people, and so we cooked it with a lot of spices and in gravy.
And I think dolma is served like at weddings and all. It's a
very festive dish. It's very it's a very festive dish, celebratory dish, and even otherwise they have it. It's a very popular dish in the community. This is one influence that made we this, because potoler dolma or potoler dorma is a very popular dish among the Bengalis, but not many know that we have taken it from the Armenians.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, you started with Nahoums, and the Jewish community maybe very small, but it has, it has a big impact on Kolkata in terms of the bakery culture. Talk to us a little bit about the bakeries of Kolkata and how did they emerge?
If I have to go to the bakeries of Calcutta, I
Hmm.
have to go into the European confectionery, and that
Right.
exactly happened with the Portuguese.
Mhm.
The Portuguese are very much responsible for the. If you read my book, the confectionery thing about Calcutta, and it's even
Right.
European confectionery, because
Right.
baking with flour and eggs, this whole concept started with the Portuguese. They were the first Europeans really to come and settle in Calcutta.
And
So
they were, earlier, I mean, their enclave was in Bandel. That
yes,
was historically their base. And
in
that was,
Hooghly.
yeah, exactly in Hooghly, which is not very far from Kolkata. Yeah, so, yeah, now, so they introduced baking to
Talking
the
about European
society.
confectionery,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, not
They
introduced.
also introduced breads, didn't they? And cheese.
Cheese is different. They introduced Bandel cheese, but that's
Yeah,
different. I would, if you
right,
have to say about the European cheese, yeah, European everything. I mean, the breads,
yeah.
the cakes, the everything. It started with the Portuguese.
Portuguese,
They
right,
really did not influence in that way because it was more or less confined to them.
right,
Portuguese started with baking, but it was confined to the homes. They did not really go beyond it and spread it. The
right,
people who spread it were the British.
right,
They when they
right,
came and they really started and they like then you have Pelletis,
right,
Chevalier Federico Pelletti, set up who had
right,
his own confectionery and restaurant, the restaurant come confectionery.
right,
Farpo's, Angelo Farpo had a
right,
restaurant come confectionery. So these
right,
then came others. If you
right.
come D Gama and all these things, bakeries came
Also,
over. Then came Flurries.
Great Eastern Hotel was
Yes,
famous
Great
for it.
Eastern Hotel was not a
Yeah,
bakery; it was a hotel. But yes, all these
yeah,
hotels had their own, separate
right,
patisseries or bakeries. You can say where you could buy these your cakes and bake
yeah.
and breads and all that thing. One
I
of the very
still,
popular thing
yeah,
about Great Eastern Hotel was the deem puff.
yeah,
Deem puff
right,
is, you can call, deem means egg. So they
yeah.
called it, instead of calling it egg puff, they named it deem puff.
Dimple.
That was a very
In
popular.
fact, I remember, there was a time when Great Eastern Hotel was shut because of union problems. But the bakery, which is to overlook, I think, there's one little street that goes by Great Eastern Hotel, and I mean, I'm talking about the Calcutta of the late 1980s. When I used to work in Calcutta, uh, that, that was the place we used to go and just pick up Deem Puff being one of our favorites. Or other things we would just pick up from there. That was the only thing that was functioning
Yeah,
at this historic hotel, which was otherwise completely wrecked by union problems.
right.
Yeah, this is much before, of course, its current makeover. Yeah, now you've got, of course, you were coming to Flurries. Tell us a bit about Flurries, because one name that everyone knows outside Kolkata is Flurries. Of course, a lot of it is also because of the Park Hotel. Park Hotel is present in many cities, and therefore Flurries travels with it everywhere. But what was special about Flurries, and how did it catch the imagination of Calcutta?
Flurries actually was set up in 1927
Right.
by Joseph and Frida Fleury.
Yeah.
And they
Who were they? Where did they come from?
they were a Swiss couple,
Right.
and the story starts that they set up Fleury's in Queen's Mansion in Park
Right.
Street,
Right.
and yeah, and then they started the. If you ask me where did they come from, my story starts with how the restaurant came up, and so it came up
Okay.
with them.
Right.
So it is tea room come confectionery. It is actually a tea
Right.
room come confectionery.
Right.
So, but you also got other, you could have your meals over there too, and it also serves one of the best continental dishes over there. The very nice continental dishes also.
Right.
So anyway, going back to the bakery part, that Joseph and Frida Fleury set it up,
Right.
and then it was like the who's who of Calcutta would go there and would visit there, because it was
Right.
in central Calcutta. It was a very posh area of Calcutta,
Right.
and a lot of people would, Lord Sinha would visit, Soumitra
Right.
Chatterjee, Uttam Kumar. So these were the clientele that came over there, and I
And
believe
Park Street is like the center of Kolkata's restaurant, the classical restaurants, and at one time it was the center of Kolkata's nightlife, just I'm just explaining it to people who are outside Kolkata, This is like the most, to use a modern jargon, it was the most happening place in Kolkata. It saw its bad days, but it's back to being very vibrant. So now tell us a little more about Park Street and the restaurants that are famous. I mean, Peter Cat is one restaurant we all know about. Again, something a name that is known outside Kolkata. What are the other places like Flurries, which are like really
Flurries is
popular?
there.
Yeah.
Flurries is there, which was ultimately taken over Park Hotel.
Right.
Mocambo. Mocambo, I want to say in that way, Mocambo is the place where Pam Craine started her career. She's known as the Queen of Park Street. She started her career in Mocambo. And and she kind of ruled the nightlife of Calcutta with her, she was one of the best jazz vocalists of Calcutta. And then, of course, you have Magnolia, which is covered in my book. Magnolia is one of the two pre-independent eateries are still continuing in from Park in Kolkata, which are there still now in Park Street. One of them is Flurries, the other one is Magnolia. So,
what kind of cuisine does Magnolia serve?
Magnolia serves basically continental, but also now it's become a bit multi-cuisine. Multi-cuisine, but the focus is more on continental.
And by continental, we mean the traditional.
Continental means it's a combination of
chicken a la Kiev type of continental.
Continental now there are plenty of it. It's like continental, the definition of continental food from all across the European continent. But when it started off, it was mainly British food. Because at the time it was the British who came and settled here. So it was the British food that dominated with few dishes here and there from the other countries of Europe. But now continental restaurants are there throughout Calcutta. And they serve just not British food, but
Italian and whatever.
The European continents,
Yeah, so one place, one dish. When you're talking about Park Street, two dishes come to mind. One of course is cello kebab, and that I don't know. And also the other dish being the tetrazzini.
Tetrazzini.
Prawn tetrazzini of Mocambo. Yeah, so did you sort of go into the history about because these are not British dishes, yeah. How did these dishes come into play in Kolkata restaurants? Like cello kebab is an Iranian dish.
It's available
at Peter Cat. In fact, I think Peter Cat has even
Peter Cat is renowned for his cello kebab.
They've even sought a GI tag for that cello kebab, which is ironic because the cello kebab is not really doesn't belong to Kolkata. It's an import, like a lot of good things. But tell us, like dishes like this. What are what is the history behind such dishes? Who brought these dishes to Kolkata?
I would say this is more like restaurant specific. If you're talking about cello kebab, it's more like I think Peter Cat. I wouldn't say cello kebab is basically a specialty of Peter Cat. And now I can see some other restaurants in Calcutta having this dish. So this, I would say, who brought it in Calcutta was the history of these dishes in Calcutta. I would say it's more like restaurant specific. It's
but like even dishes like chicken a la Kiev, frankly, of course, it has a Russian origin,
Yes, it had a Russian origin, but it was there during the British period. It was there
but it sort of became popular during the British period. Again, did you go into the history of all these? How did these dishes come? And now they're very much part of not only Kolkata's dining out culture, but like a lot of cooks from Kolkata, especially those who lost their jobs, during partition or were dislocated by partition, a lot of them came to Delhi, and they introduced all these dishes like chicken. Delhi did not know about chicken ala Kiev till some, cook from Kolkata introduced it in Delhi. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so his
You see,
name is one
chicken,
Mr. Gomes.
the tetrazzini, ala
Mm,
cave,
yeah,
these dishes were very much there from the British period.
right,
And
right.
the cooks, the chefs of Calcutta,
Mm,
they say it's uh, the chefs that dominated the British household, the clubs and the companies
mm,
of this. Number one were the
right,
mogs, and they were, they whatever was taught to them by their
right,
British masters and by the Memesides and sides, basically
right,
the Memesides.
right,
They learned that obviously they became experts cooks in the process.
right,
And when the British, they obviously the colonial powers, they left our country.
right.
And they passed on these cooking skills, these recipes now to everybody, to all the other chefs in Calcutta. And so
Mm,
now, yes, so these things now are well known by all the chefs in Calcutta.
right, right.
Who specialize in perhaps in continental dishes, you can say. But
That's right.
these started, tetrazzini, alaki, these all came from the British period.
Right.
The
That's
European
true.
powers, I would say, they brought it in with them. So this is because it
Right.
was once the Calcutta was the hub of these people. So they brought it with them. They taught it to
Yeah.
the Mogs, the Dhaka.
And people like Furpo and Peliti, sort of they were at once
Yes, you
upon a
also
time they
remember
were
that
like the
the cooks who worked for these people were all the local cooks. They were picked up from the locals. The local
right,
cooks for them. They were taught these, how to make these. They passed
right,
it down
right,
to other people, locals,
right,
and that's how the thing has got spread.
right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
But for instance, like Furpo, once upon a time it was such a big brand name, but then it faded away. Sort of Peliti, of course, died. I mean, the brand died many years ago, many decades ago. Like, uh, which one, like you name Magnolia, which sort of was there before, before
Independent.
partition, before independence. And which are these brands which have been there, like these old restaurants, and which is the oldest restaurant in Kolkata?
My God, that's a tough question. Oldest restaurant in Kolkata.
Yeah.
See, let me
Like
tell you one
in
thing. There
Delhi,
are
for instance, I'm in Delhi, so I can, flaunt a little bit of Delhi knowledge. Like in Delhi, a lot of people believe that Kareem's is the oldest restaurant. Though, I mean, it is as old as, oldest surviving restaurant, that is, so it opened around the time of the Darbar of 1911, when King George V visited Delhi. And it has been continuing since then. So it's now more than 110 years
the
old.
question is, you're
So
talking about which is the oldest surviving restaurant in
yeah,
Calcutta?
oldest surviving restaurant.
Uh, there are so many covered in my
Yeah.
book. Let me see where I have to go back. I think it was the oldest surviving, I would
Yeah.
say. Uh, there's a this again falls into the chops and cutlets section. Chacha's Hotel, I would say.
Chachas, yeah, that's
Chacha
right.
Hotel is very old. Now, I cannot say whether it's the oldest, but as far as I remember, vaguely the date is the oldest so far. It's oldest surviving. It's very old. It's very
Right,
old. Chacha
right.
Hotel is very old.
So what is the story of Chacha Hotel and who was Chacha?
Chacha there was a gentleman named, he was fondly called Chacha. He
Yeah.
used to work in a tea stall.
Right,
A tea stall and owned by this Muslim gentleman. His name was Chacha, and everybody fondly called him Chacha.
right,
And Chacha left. Chacha, this gentleman, he left. Okay, so
right,
this he was given. So he gave one of his employees this
right,
restaurant,
right.
and he said, "Take it over." And he named it Chacha's Hotel,
Okay.
and it
So,
basically
yeah,
specialized in chops and cutlets and all this. The chops and
right,
cutlets culture of Calcutta. It is the oldest restaurant in that regard. So if
right,
I can say which is the oldest restaurant in Calcutta, if I have to say, as far as I can remember, Chacha is very old.
yeah. What
Hmm.
about the Chinese? Among Chinese restaurants, you mentioned Changhua,
Changwa.
but there's also the
Before
you
Changwa, there was one more called, it was not a restaurant, it was a kiosk called Fat Mama.
Yeah, Fat Mama, because she left for
Tossed.
Toronto, you know, she
Changwa,
left
if you're
for,
talking about surviving,
yeah,
it's very difficult to say give one name, because
yeah,
every section, Chinese has some of the oldest still surviving.
right, right.
Bengal, so like the chops and cutlets eateries, one
Chachas,
of the
yeah.
oldest. Tea,
And
one
then,
of the
yeah,
oldest. Favorite Kevin. And
the-
if you're talking about Chinese,
yeah,
Fat Mama closed, and I would say the oldest surviving now is Changwa.
okay. So now, coming back to, I'm always going from community to community because there's so many communities in Kolkata. One thing, the two things which are two dishes of Kolkata which have become very popular. One, of course, is the biryani. Yeah,
Yeah.
biryani and risala have become quite popular all over India. The other is, other roles, and Nizam's has almost become a brand name now. So tell us a little bit about, the biryani culture of Kolkata, and what research did you do about how Avdi biryani came into Kolkata, and how, how did it change? How was the potato introduced into the biryani? Tell us a little bit about the
Biryani culture
excitement
is
about
Nawab Wajid
around
Ali
these
Shah.
dishes.
I would
Yeah,
say it's Nawab Wajid Ali Shah. The biryani
right,
journey of biryani in Calcutta started with Nawab Wajid Ali Shah.
right, yeah,
Right. So, when Nawab Wajid Ali Shah, he came to Calcutta and settled in Mitya Bruce,
right.
because
And Mitya Bruce is the port area of Kolkata, isn't it?
Mitya Bruce, yes, you can say so.
Yeah,
And it's, so he came and settled in Calcutta in
yeah,
Mitya Bruce. And that's where you can see the journey of journey of biryani started in Calcutta.
right.
And it was with him. And then, but when Nawab Wajid Ali Shah came and settled in Calcutta, the cooks, that is where Calcutta aloo biryani started, because it's a
Right.
very well-known story along with some people say that he had to uh, cut costs, his chefs, so they
Mm.
had to, along with the meat, they added potato. But the descendants of Nawab Wajid Ali Shah, they dispute this. They say no.
That's right.
Somebody who's given a pension of 12 lakhs a year
Mm.
annually cannot,
That's a lot of money in those
that's a
days,
lot of
no?
money. So you cannot have, it's just out of uh, out of जो हम बोलते shock say, out of their own
Mm.
desire, they added potatoes to the biryani and they started.
I have a theory, because I think, look, Nawab Wajid Ali Shah also built like a replica of the Chota Imambara in Mitya Buruj. It's a famous, if you visited that place, you'll know. I mean, he left behind a lot of legacies, and he actually constructed a lot of things. Not that he was living out of pocket, he was a fairly wealthy man, and
Yes, so they cannot be that
yeah.
they had to cut costs and they had,
Yeah.
because of which they added the
Is
potato.
it because, at that time, say the late 1850s, early 1860s, potato was still a novelty. I mean, and, Bengal, of course, was one of the earliest places in India to be introduced to the potato. Uh, so, was it that
I don't know about
Nawab
that.
just got excited by the potato and thought, chalo, isse bhi laga do is biryani mein. Or one of his cooks may have realized that it's a great flavor. I mean, it's a vegetable which sucks
There were
in
several
flavor.
other dishes,
Yeah,
that were cooked, but they were not responsible.
yeah.
The
Like
cooks,
risala,
so
for
they were
example.
not responsible for. I wouldn't say that it was due to them that you see the cooks who worked in the Nawab's
Yeah,
house in Mitya Bruce, in the
yeah,
Mitya Bruce house, I wouldn't say they were responsible for spreading the biryani culture so
yeah,
much. They introduced biryani. People got
yeah,
to know about Calcutta biryani, but it
right,
was the cooks
right,
who came from Uttar Pradesh and who settled
right,
in Calcutta and started
right,
restaurants. The
right,
biryani culture was very much spread by them, and they picked up this aloo biryani from Nawab Wajid Ali
right,
Shah's
right.
thing, and then they spread it. The first biryani restaurant to come up in Calcutta was Royal Indian Hotel, followed by the Royal.
Royal, Royal Indian.
It's not Royal
Yeah.
Indian Hotel,
Okay.
but in short they say Royal,
Okay. Okay.
Royal,
Fine. So
which is
that's
in
a royal.
Chitpur,
Okay.
which is in
Okay.
Chitpur, and they started. They started but they don't have the Calcutta aloo biryani. It's more like the typical. kofti biryani, means full of meat
Right.
koftis, you know.
Right.
And then after that came this Armenia.
Armenia.
They're the
Yeah.
pioneers. The biryani culture pioneers, Royal and Armenia. Armenia is the Calcutta aloo biryani.
Right.
Nizam's, more than biryani, it's known for its kathi rolls.
Yeah. Kathi rolls. Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so kathi rolls is more like, you know, it's like this. The whole story goes that Khalif, that the owner of Nizam's, he
Right.
and his cook, they were making parathas and kebabs separately. You know, they had this small stall outside this new market in the Lindsay Street area, and they were making parathas and kebabs separately, and they would be serving it to the Europeans. And Europeans loved it; they enjoyed it very much. Then, but you know, the Europeans are very uppity and they're very conscious about the cleanliness and all that. And so, what they suggested that why don't you stuff the paratha, the kebabs into the paratha, roll them and serve them. So that's how the concept of rolls came. They began stuffing the kebabs into the paratha, rolled it and wrapped it in the end with a newspaper and served it. That gave birth to the concept of rolls in Calcutta.
Yeah, and which we are fortunate to have Nizams even in Delhi.
Yes, Nizam has spread.
Right.
It spread its wings really.
Right. And of course, there are a lot of places which use the Nizam's brand name without actually being related to Nizam's in any way. But the one in Delhi is a genuine Nizam's. I mean, it was set up by the Nizam's family, and but of course, it's run by a pretty well-known restaurateur in Delhi. But that's another story altogether. What would like in Delhi, for instance, there are two camps as far as biryani is concerned. There's the royal camp and there's the Arsalan camp.
Oh.
So, which biryani, according to you, is better?
It's a tough task.
It's like
I'm going to play safe. That's all.
What you?
I'm going to play safe. I'll say all of them are good.
You're being a diplomat.
Yeah, I'm going to be
like in Hyderabad. It's like Shadab.
Really.
Yeah, in Hyderabad, it's between Shadab and Paradise, for instance.
Okay.
In Delhi, in Kolkata, it's in Delhi, for instance. If someone were to ask, like, the very hardcore Kareem's loyalists and there are hardcore Jawahar loyalists, Al Jawahar loyalists. So, like, you don't know how come they become hardcore supporters of this or that, but obviously there are camps even in food, and that's what makes it very interesting. Now, we have dealt with, we've talked about bakeries, we've talked about, biryanis, we've talked a little more about the Chinese. Now, most people call Chinese food from Kolkata as Tangra Chinese. Now, as far as I know, Tangra did not really have a great restaurant culture because it was a tannery area, Only when the tanneries left, did the restaurants start opening in Calcutta. Is that right, or am I completely off tangent? Please explain to me, my viewers, about how Chinese food came into Calcutta and how did it spread.
Chinese food came into Calcutta with the community, with the Chinese, when the Chinese community came and settled here. Basically, Old Chinatown started it. They started in Old Chinatown, but that was very authentic Chinese food.
Old Chinatown is in central Calcutta, isn't it?
Yes. So they basically that Chinese was a very authentic, if you can say, authentic Chinese when it started. I'm talking about years back when it started, and and that's where this restaurants called Nankin came up.
Right.
Changhua came up. Nankin is no longer there. Nankin came up. Changhua came up. Nankin at that point of time, obviously, it always served very traditional Chinese food.
Right.
Eau Chew came up. Eau Chew is still there. Changhua has now gone into the commercial Chinese.
Right.
But Eau Chew is one of the this is one of the only family-owned Chinese restaurants in India.
In fact,
when
I asked you what is the oldest restaurant in Kolkata, if you were to ask me this quiz question, I would say Eau Chew. That has a continuous history of over about I think it is nearly 150 plus years old, but I could be wrong. Sorry, not 150. I'm wrong. It's about 100 years old.
I think there are older ones.
Okay,
For
I'm
example,
sure.
Chacha is older than that.
Tachas is older, but
Chinese, which is the existing, I would say I would definitely say not Eau Chew.
yeah,
If you say more authentic Chinese food, which is the oldest one, it's Eau Chew. But actually, it's Changhua. Because it
actually,
started with Fat Mama,
right,
then came Changhua, then came Nankin,
right,
and Eau Chew is like that over there somewhere.
right.
Around that
But
time.
Eau Chew is like one of the traditional.
If you say authentic Chinese, which is still continuing a little bland and not many, not this too much of soya sauce and all that. That's Eau Chew. That's Eau Chew. But Eau Chew has a very select clientele that goes to it. It is more like a very who have got used to the bland taste of this Eau Chew Chinese food that it serves, and they like it very much.
That is a traditional Hakka Chinese.
Yes, if you talk about the masses, you choose still to make an impact. You choose more like niche. You get the idea. Yeah. That's but if you talk about
Chungwa is, of course, hugely
now
popular.
It's very commercial Chinese, which I say is Indian Chinese.
Right. Punjabi Chinese, as we say in Delhi.
What Chinese?
Punjabi Chinese.
Punjabi Chinese.
We also have another term called Sino-Ludhianvi cuisine. So
but if you're talking about this Indian Chinese cuisine that actually started from New Chinatown. New Chinatown is very much responsible for starting because you see, when New Chinatown came up, these Chinese restaurants in New Chinatown, like in Old Chinatown, they had these small homes. They were confined to the homes, and they
New Chinatown is what we call Tangra, or
Tangra. That's right.
And so, in fact, whatever little I remember of New Chinatown is that they're actually all the restaurants are in homes. They're like, like the garage or the home.
Used to be not all of them, that's how they started. Okay. That's how they started. It used to be in homes, and then then you said the neighboring areas, the Bengalis would come and eat.
Right.
Not just the Bengalis, even in other communities, they would come and eat Chinese over there. And they obviously Indians, we love spicy food, so they would like the food, but they would say some more spice and some more, more spicier, the more spiced up version will taste better. So for their sake, because the restaurant owners in New Chinatown realize there's a potential here. Customers are coming from other communities and they're eating. So to cater to them, cater to their interests, they began spicing up the Chinese and started, and that's how the Indian Chinese thing started. They'd say that Calcutta is the birthplace of Indian Chinese.
Of Indian Chinese, that's true.
Calcutta is the birthplace of the Indian Chinese because the Chinese first came and settled in Calcutta. So that's true. So this is where it started, and then obviously this spread. The new generation went beyond the Chinatowns, and they set up Chinese restaurants all over Calcutta. Went beyond Calcutta, West Bengal, set up, and that's how it spread. And when I was interviewing, they said some places we depending on Chinese food is one thing I would say is very adaptable. Everywhere you
that's why it has traveled all over the world.
Throughout the world, there are Chinatowns. Throughout the world, there are Chinatowns. And Chinese food is something that's very adaptable because it's a little on the bland side. So, when people go, when Chinese people, they see, okay, here is a market and this is the kind of demand that the people have for, they want a little spices, so I make it a little spices. They want the heat quotient up, so I make the heat quotient up. They want it a little bit less spicy. So, they kind of adapt it wherever they go according to the needs of the people.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So that's interesting. So look, we have covered a lot of ground, from chachas to actually we started with Nahoums, and we've come to Eau Chew and Changhua.
One very interesting, one very nice. I haven't covered that obviously, but another very nice bakery. You asked about bakery. I just remembered now, Saldana. I haven't gone into the history of Saldana, but Saldana is a very good bakery. It's in central Calcutta. It's like it's inside a home. Makes one of the best walnut cakes.
Oh, wow. Okay. So like these are the discoveries I think which people get very excited about.
Wise, Gigama, Saldana, Fleury's.
Right.
Fleury's is obviously in a different level, but they're all there.
I think
there is a row called in Newmarket. Sorry to interrupt. There's a row in Newmarket called the F row.
Right.
That is the bakery row.
Okay.
So there used to be a lot of bakeries. See what happened. Many of them, they left India, so they shut down. But Nahoum's is in the F row. So
Right.
these many bakeries. This F row in Newmarket is known as the bakery row.
Bakery Row.
Yeah.
And Nahoum's is like one of the oldest surviving bakeries
Yes,
in that
1950.
place, Yeah. Amazing. So, and that was, of course, the start of your journey. And so
Yes.
now, how can we not talk about the sweet shops of Kolkata?
Yeah.
That I think
Ishti.
those everyone wants to have a bit of mishti from Kolkata, whether they know anything. And like in Delhi, of course, there was a time when people used to think that rasgulla, as they call rasgulla in Delhi, is equivalent to Kolkata. Of course,
Yes.
there's so much more to the
There's so
sweet
much
treat
more.
culture.
People like
Tell
this.
us, tell us about it. Tell us
Calcutta has
about.
become synonymous with Rashgola. You want me to talk about the Mishti shops?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
Mishti shops. So basically, here again, the Portuguese come in. Portuguese have played a big role in the confectionery side of Calcutta. Whereas the European confectionery, more than that, I would say, is the Bengali confectionery.
Yeah.
Because before the Portuguese came into Calcutta, came to Bengal, Bengali sweets is more or less Monda Mithai, and the concept of chana. We believe that chana has it started. The Bengali Moiras are responsible for chana, but no, it has its roots in Portuguese cooking.
Mm.
And this is a very big discovery that even I made while I was researching on this
Right.
subject. That chana has its roots in Portuguese cooking,
Right.
because this whole concept of curdling milk using an
Right.
acid agent like lime juice or vinegar,
Right.
and that when it curdles into a lump, into a mass, and then draining
Right.
the whey,
Right.
right, and then shaping it into giving that mass of kesan,
Right.
which in Bengali we call chana. That is chana, or in English kesan, giving it
Right.
shape. That technique, the Moiras, the Mog cooks, they used to employ a lot of Mogs. Mogs were excellent cooks. So the Portuguese used to employ a lot of Mogs with them. The Mogs learned that from the Portuguese. They used to be employed by the Portuguese for cooking, as
Right.
chefs. So so they learned it from them, and they used to make band cheese out of it.
Right.
Actually, Portuguese used to make cheese, not sweets out
Mm.
of this chana, this case.
Mm.
They used to add salt to it. They would
Right.
either eat it plain or smoked, shaped
Mm.
into ovals or flat disc, round flat disc, and that's
Right.
how because they used to live in Bandel.
Right.
Portuguese were concentrated mainly in Bandel. Came to be known as Bandel cheese,
Middle cheese.
right?
Yes.
Bandel
Yes.
cheese, and so bandel cheese, but this technique was learned by them, by the mobs,
Right.
and they passed it on to the Moiras. So what happened,
Yes.
this is a bit of history over here, is
Right.
that Hooghly,
Right.
there were many family-owned animal husbandry businesses in Hooghly.
Yeah. That they used to own cows. Like
Yes, they
they
used to
were.
own cows, and their family-owned animal husbandry
Yes.
businesses, and
Yes.
so they used to own cows, and there always used to be a bit of surplus milk. What would they do with this milk? They would
Right.
make sweets out of it.
Right.
Initially, they would make sweets out of foya, which is
Right.
also known as mawa. They
Right.
would make this as the solid lump that you get
Right.
by boiling full cream milk to
Right.
a dense mass, and
The
then
solidified milk, basically.
solidify
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But when chana came, when they learned how to make chana, when the Mogs, they passed on that skill to the Moiras, to these
Yeah.
people, they learned how to make chana.
Right.
They used out of this unsold surplus milk, they would make
Right.
chana out of it and make sweets. So
Right.
when Calcutta became the capital of the British Raj,
Right.
and even slightly before that, when Calcutta was becoming the very important center of trade and commerce, most of
Right.
these old, early street shop owners in
Right.
Calcutta are from Hooghly.
Probably. And they're all Moiras, essentially Moiras, so sort of.
Moiras
Yeah.
is like we say halwais in.
That brings me to another. You've got Moiras and you've got Halwikars. In Kolkata, there's that division. And in fact, the Biharis would get very upset if you don't talk about the Bihari contribution to Bengali sweet culture. In fact, Ganguram, of course, is one of the prominent Biharis
No, Gangurams was in Banaras.
Okay, well, I mean, Biharis claim him to be from
Is it?
Bihar. Yeah,
Gangura is from
no, Ganguram, but the fact is, even now, most of the people employed by the sweet shops of Kolkata are not Bengalis. They're mostly Biharis.
okay.
Yeah, now that is something which, like, in fact, people in Bihar will always tell you that, look, we are the ones who are, like people in Odisha will tell you, look, we created Rasgulla, which,
Yes, that's a big
which
controversy, and I've covered it in my book. Yes, that's a big controversy.
that's a huge
The tug of
controversy.
war.
Similarly, Biharis would tell you, and like I have a lot of Bihari friends in Delhi, there are a lot of Biharis, that, what would Bengali sweet shops be without Biharis, They're the ones who make, and in fact, that's why, traditionally, the Biharis were called Halwikars from Halwai. So, but anyway, so which, most of these sweet shops were in North Calcutta.
Yes, because North Calcutta was, yes, black
Yeah.
town.
And among them, like, coming to Rasgulla, how did this become such a big industry in Bengal?
Okay. Uh,
And like everyone knows what Kesi Das,
yeah. So
Yeah.
basically, Kesi Das is basically, the founder of Kesi Das is Navin Chandra Das.
Right.
If I go a bit into the details about Rasgulla,
Right.
that's, do you want me to go into the bit of the Orissa
Of
Bengal?
course.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So Orissa Bengal thing is that,
It'll enliven our discussion as we come to an
yes,
end of it.
yes, yes. So
Yeah.
what happened is that the the Orisha people have always claimed that Rasgulla is from their side, and from that it's their discovery. And obviously Bengal, it's their discovery. So they have always claimed that. Now they have a history is that in Orisha, they say that it originated, they call it Rasagola. I don't know how to exactly pronounce it. It's Rasagola, Rasgulla. So they, according to the food historians from Odisha, Rasgulla originated sometime around the 12th century.
Right.
And it originated in the Rashtraghara, or the kitchen of the Sri Jagannath temple in Puri. And they say it happened in the 12th century. How it happened was, at that point of time, it was, the Ratha Yatra that used to take place in Puri temple. Lord Jagannath, on his way back from Ratha Yatra is the 10-day annual chariot ride. And when he used to come back from the Ratha Yatra, the last day of Ratha Yatra is known as Niladri Vijay.
Right.
So Niladri Vijay, he used to come back. On his way back, he had to pacify his consort goddess Lakshmi, because he could not take her along to the Ratha Yatra. So on his way back from Sri Gundicha temple, he would, when he would return, to pacify her, he would give her this Kheera Mohana. Kheera Mohana is basically said to be you can say, Rasgulla descended from Kheera Mohana. All right. So he used to give her Kheera Mohana, and it has become a religious tradition in the Jagannath temple in Puri to offer goddess Mahalakshmi as bhog, this sweet, on Niladri Vijay. Now, Kheera Mohana is basically, it's slightly flat, it's round, slightly flat, and it's brownish in color because it's cooked. They call it, it's made of chena. They don't call it chana, they call it chena, the Orias, and it's cooked in raseni for a long time, raseni sugar syrup. So the sweet that comes, this is Kheera Mohana, and Rasgulla is said to be a descendant of Kheera Mohana. It has come from Kheera Mohana. Now, food historians of Bengal, they contest this. They contest this because they say this cannot happen, because they say that the chana arrived in a country with the arrival of the Portuguese, and the Portuguese came around the 1500s.
Right.
And they're saying that there's no way that this sweet could have been made in the 12th century. Ultimately, what happened is, so this tug of war has gone on for a long time and ultimately ended in a draw. With
both the states getting a GI tag,
GI tag. with it's known as Bengal in 2017 Bangla Rasgulla GI tag, and then 2 years later Odisha Rasgulla. All right,
But
so this
let
got a
me tell
GI
you,
tag. So based
I,
on
I
this,
yeah,
people believe that there is some difference in the color and texture and
that's
taste,
right.
juice content, and all that.
You know,
So
I've I've had Rasgulla in Odisha, in this village on the way to Puri, and their Rasgulla is almost reddish, They cook the milk a little more than I think the Bengalis do. Interestingly,
yes,
in Bihar, again, the Rasgullas are just like the Odisha Rasgullas.
okay.
They have a little reddish color. So, I mean, like even in the world of rasgullas, there's so much of diversity, which I guess is the beauty of India. And I think your book so beautifully brings out this diversity. And it's quite a thick book. Let me show it again to all the viewers. A taste of time. It's a thick book full of facts. Let me you can read it any time of the day, and you learn something interesting and informative. Um, Now, how long did it take you to put together this book? Now, I'm going to ask you like a writer's question. How long did you research and write this book for?
To be honest, 5 to 6 years.
That's right. I mean, it shows the work shows it's like a PhD thesis. I think you can hand this over to Kolkata University or now the Presidency University and get a PhD degree for it. Thank you so much, Mohana. Any last thoughts on Kolkata? Where is the food culture of Kolkata going? What is it that really excites you about Kolkata?
Kolkata are Calcuttans are foodies.
Right,
So the food culture will never go out of Calcutta. On
right,
the contrary, it's increasing more and more. So young generation is very experimental,
right,
right? Young generation is very experimental, which is the reason why today we have the momos and thupkas coming in from Darjeeling district. It's the most
right,
popular. It's the most
right,
popular post-independent immigrant cuisine. If I can call, they are part. Obviously,
right,
Darjeeling is very much a part of West Bengal. If you say they
right,
came and settled here, the people from Darjeeling district, the Tibetans, and everybody else, this momos and thupkas, they are very much, and the clientele is basically the young generation.
right,
Very much the young generation. Even Northeast food is not coming in. It is just picking up. You know,
right.
it's just picking up. So, and Kolkata is such a food hub. There is. I've also written this in my book that there are.
Right,
You have the bespectacled Bengali babu of moderate means going to
right,
restaurants of his that suits his budget, and you have the
right,
spendthrift fashionista who's going to this very posh restaurant to spend
right,
and eat food. So you have
right,
on one hand here Park Street. This is
right,
a food street of Calcutta that
right,
houses a fair number of posh
right,
restaurants.
right,
On the other hand, you have the Decker's Lane,
right,
which is the mecca of street food in Calcutta.
right,
Nook and cranny of Calcutta, you go. I live in Calcutta, so I
right.
know Kolkata, so I know it's food, restaurants, kiosks, everything selling food. So yes, food culture will never go. It's thriving, and I think it's open to more influences coming in
Right.
the future.
I think that's the beauty of Kolkata. It's always accepting.
It's very tolerant.
Yeah,
Calcutta
it's
is a
very
very tolerant city,
it's a
and it's
syncretic culture.
tolerant of in every respect. Yes.
It's I think the Bengalis outside Bengal are known as little crazy, little unpredictable. But you can take the craziness out of a Bengali, but you cannot take the tolerance out of a Bengali. The broad mind and the broad heart that all Bengalis are gifted with. Thank you so much, Mohana. We look forward to your next book. There was once upon a time Mr. Thankampal Nair, who was the barefoot historian of Kolkata. I
I
think
admire him. Wow.
I
His,
think
his
you can head in that direction. Food is one area to begin with, but there's so much of Kolkata which has to be discovered for the rest of the world. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for
Thank
giving
you for
us
having me.
time, and see you soon.
Sure.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Namaste.